Detective Ryan Ganon adjusted his silk tie, wearing the confident, practiced smile of a man who owned the courtroom. He pointed directly at the defendant, a quiet black woman in a cheap grey cardigan, and swore under oath that she was a mid-level narcotics trafficker. He had the planted evidence to prove it. What Ganon didn't know was that the terrified woman, wiping a tear from her eye, wasn't a helpless civilian. She was the federal agent who was about to dismantle his entire life. The mahogany walls of courtroom 302 in the downtown Baltimore courthouse felt more like a theater than a hall of justice. The air was heavy, smelling of floor wax, old paper, and the nervous sweat of the accused. Sitting at the defense table, Denise Carter looked small. She wore an oversized grey cardigan over a plain white blouse, her hands clasped tightly together, her shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, occasionally welling with tears that she would hastily blink away. To the 12 men and women sitting in the jury box, she was a sympathetic but ultimately guilty figure. To the assistant district attorney, Simone Russo, she was just another notch on his belt, an open and shut case that would keep his conviction rate soaring. But to Detective Ryan Ganon, currently making himself comfortable on the witness stand, she was nothing more than collateral damage. Ganon was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man whose broad shoulders and silver-flecked hair gave him an aura of unassailable authority. He wore his badge on his belt, and his arrogance like a second skin. He leaned into the microphone, his voice a gravelly baritone that commanded the room. "Detective Ganon," Adia Russo began, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "Can you describe the events of the evening of October 14th? "Certainly, Counselor," Ganon replied, locking eyes with a juror in the front row. It was a classic cop trick. Build trust, seem relatable. "My partner, Officer Paul Detman, and I were conducting a routine patrol in the West District. At approximately 11:45 p.m., we observed a blue Honda Civic traveling northbound on Fremont Avenue. The vehicle had a busted taillight and was swerving erratically, crossing the double yellow line twice within 3 blocks. At the defense table, Denise Carter let out a quiet, stifled sob. Her defense attorney, a rumpled public defender named Arthur Pendleton, put a comforting hand on her arm. "And what did you do upon observing this traffic violation?" Russo asked. "We initiated a traffic stop. The driver, the defendant, Miss Carter, pulled over. When I approached the driver's side window, she was highly agitated, sweating profusely despite the cool weather, and refused to make eye contact. It was a beautiful lie. Flawless in its execution, standard in its terminology. Ganon had recited variations of this exact script hundreds of times over his career. It was the blue template for establishing probable cause. "Did you ask to search the vehicle?" "I did," Ganon said smoothly. Given her nervous behavior and the faint odor of what I recognized from my training and experience to be narcotics, I asked Miss Carter to step out of the vehicle. I then conducted a probable cause search of the car. Russo nodded, picking up a heavy, clear plastic evidence bag from his table. Inside sat a taped, rectangular brick of white powder. "And what, Detective, did you find in the spare tire compartment of the trunk?" "I found a kilo of uncut cocaine, wrapped in industrial tape," Ganon said, his voice ringing with righteous finality. "Street value of approximately $40,000. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Arthur Wallace banged his gavel twice, demanding order. "Thank you, Detective," Russo said, smiling thinly. "Your witness." Arthur Pendleton stood up. He looked exactly like a man who was overworked, underpaid, and utterly outmatched. He fumbled with his legal pad, dropping a pen before finally walking to the podium. "Detective Ganon," Pendleton started, his voice lacking any real bite. "Are you absolutely certain my client was the one swerving? It was a dark, rainy night, was it not?" "I'm certain, Counselor." Ganon smirked. He loved cross-examination from public defenders. It was like swatting away gnats. "And you're testifying, under penalty of perjury, that you didn't place that bag of narcotics in the trunk yourself?" Ganon's face hardened, projecting the perfect mixture of professional offense and righteous indignation. "I take my oath to this city very seriously, Mr. Pendleton. I found those drugs exactly where the defendant hid them." Denise Carter buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. Ganon watched her with cold detachment. He didn't hate her. He didn't even really care about her. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, driving a car that fit the profile, in a neighborhood where nobody asked questions. Ganon needed a high-profile bust to justify a federal grant his unit was applying for, and Denise Carter was the sacrificial lamb. What Detective Ganon failed to realize as he sat comfortably on his throne of lies was that the woman crying at the defense table wasn't named Denise Carter. She had never sold a drug in her life. Her real name was Special Agent Maya Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and she had been hunting Ryan Ganon for 2 years. 18 months prior, in a soundproof briefing room deep within the FBI's Baltimore field office, Maya Reynolds was staring at a wall covered in photographs, bank records, and crime scene reports. Maya was 32, a former forensic accountant turned undercover operative, possessing a terrifying intellect and a chameleon-like ability to disappear into any persona. She was a rising star in the Bureau's public corruption unit, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her absolute refusal to back down from a fight. Standing next to her was her supervisor, Special Agent in Charge Daniel Higgins. He pointed a laser pointer at the center of the corkboard, directly between the eyes of Detective Ryan Ganon. "The 12th Precinct's Narcotics Unit," Higgins said, his voice tight with frustration. "They call themselves the Night Shift. For the last 5 years, they've been running the West District like a cartel. Extortion, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and outright theft." "How much are they skimming?" Maya asked, crossing her arms, her eyes scanning the financial web pinned to the board. "At least $1 million a year. They raid a stash house, report half the cash, and pocket the rest. If a dealer doesn't play ball and pay their protection fee, the Night Shift suddenly finds a kilo in their trunk and sends them upstate for 20 years. Maya frowned, zooming in on Ganon's photograph. He looked smug, even in his official department portrait. "Why hasn't Internal Affairs brought them down?" "Because Ganon is smart," Higgins replied. "He never hits the big players who have high-priced lawyers. He targets the marginalized. Poor, working-class folks, usually minorities, people the system is already designed to ignore. Who is a jury going to believe? A decorated 20-year veteran with a chest full of medals, or a black single mother from the projects?" Maya felt a cold, familiar anger coil in her stomach. It was the same anger that had driven her to join the Bureau in the first place. She despised bullies, but she held a special, venomous hatred for those who hid their cruelty behind a badge. "They protect each other," Higgins continued. "The blue wall of silence is impenetrable. We can't get a wiretap because we don't have enough solid evidence for a judge, and we can't flip any of his guys because they're all getting rich. The only way to take Ganon down is to catch him in the act. We need to feed him a target he can't resist. Someone he thinks he can crush without a second thought." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Higgins looked at her carefully. "This isn't a standard undercover buy, Maya. You'll be going in completely unbadged. No backup in the immediate vicinity. If Ganon realizes you're federal, these guys wouldn't think twice about putting a bullet in your head and dumping you in the Chesapeake." "Let them try," Maya said, her voice like ice. Over the next 3 months, Maya meticulously crafted the life of Denise Carter. It wasn't just a fake ID. It was a fully realized, three-dimensional existence. The Bureau created a history of credit card debt, a spotty employment record as a medical billing assistant, and a lease on a run-down apartment in the heart of Ganon's territory. They even gave her a modest digital footprint, a neglected Facebook page, a few unpaid parking tickets to make her look completely ordinary and slightly struggling. Maya moved into the apartment in November. She drove a leased, dented blue Honda Civic. She shopped at the local discount grocery store, went to the laundromat on Tuesday nights, and waited. The hardest part of undercover work wasn't the danger. It was the agonizing, mind-numbing boredom. You had to live the life, breathe the air of the persona. Maya spent months just existing as Denise, learning the rhythms of the neighborhood, watching the police cruisers roll slowly down the streets like sharks patrolling a reef. She made sure to be seen. She worked a real part-time job at a local clinic, coming home late at night. She established a routine that crossed paths with Ganon's patrol routes. The Bureau had fed quiet rumors through their street informants that Denise was carrying cash for a mid-level distributor. It was a subtle breadcrumb, just enough to catch a dirty cop's attention. Ganon took the bait. Maya first noticed the tail in early September. It was clumsy, arrogant. A marked cruiser sitting a block away from her apartment. A week later, she saw Ganon himself sitting in an unmarked Ford Explorer outside her laundromat, his cold eyes tracking her as she loaded her baskets into the Honda. He was assessing her, calculating her vulnerability. She was a black woman living alone, with no apparent family ties, working late hours. In Ganon's predatory calculus, she was the perfect victim. Maya knew the strike was coming. She just had to make sure the trap was perfectly set when the hammer fell. The night of October 14th was a miserable, torrential downpour, the kind of rain that slicked the Baltimore streets in a layer of oily black and drowned out the sounds of the city. Maya was driving home from her shift at the clinic. Her pulse was steady, a slow, rhythmic drumbeat in her chest. She had been briefed that morning by her handlers. The night shift was on patrol, and Ganon was in command. Tonight was the night. Inside the blue Honda Civic, Maya was surrounded by invisible ghosts. The Bureau's Technical Operations Group had spent 2 days wiring the vehicle. There was a pinhole, high-definition camera embedded in the rearview mirror housing, facing outward. Another was hidden in the air conditioning vent, aimed directly at the driver's window. The ceiling fabric concealed 3 ultra-sensitive microphones. A GPS tracker the size of a dime was welded to the chassis. But the real masterpiece was in the trunk. Unit 4 to dispatch. We are initiating a traffic stop on a blue Honda, Maryland plates Charlie Delta Niner 2. Maya saw the blinding flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, not out of fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. She signaled and pulled over to the curb, the rain drumming furiously against the roof of the car. She rolled down her window, letting the cold, damp air flood the cabin. She took a deep breath, dropped her shoulders, and instantly transitioned from Special Agent Maya Reynolds into terrified, exhausted Denise Carter. Heavy footsteps splashed through the puddles. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding her momentarily. "License and registration." The gravelly voice of Detective Ganon barked over the rain. Of course, officer," Maya stammered, her hands visibly shaking as she reached into her glove box. Was I speeding?" "You swerved over the double yellow back there," Ganon said, leaning close to the window. He didn't take the paperwork she offered. Instead, he swept his flashlight around the interior of her car. "You been drinking tonight, Denise?" "No, sir. I just got off work at the clinic." At the rear of the car, Maya heard a loud crack. Officer Detman, Ganon's partner, had just smashed her passenger-side taillight with the butt of his heavy Maglite flashlight. "Looks like you got a busted taillight too," Ganon said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Step out of the car." "Why? I didn't do anything wrong," Maya cried, injecting panic into her voice. "Step out of the car now," Ganon ordered, his hand resting menacingly on the butt of his service weapon. Maya complied, stepping out into the freezing rain. She wrapped her cheap cardigan around herself, shivering violently. Detman grabbed her arm, roughly spinning her around and slamming her chest against the wet side of the car, kicking her legs apart. "Pat her down," Ganon told Detman, moving toward the trunk. This was the critical moment. Maya's face was pressed against the cold metal of the roof, rain soaking her hair. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched Ganon. Ganon popped the trunk. He leaned in, blocking the view from the street with his broad back. But he couldn't block the hidden camera wired into the trunk lid. Maya knew exactly what that camera was recording. It was capturing Ganon, pulling a heavy taped brick of cocaine from his own tactical jacket. It was recording him, shoving it deep into the spare tire compartment of her Honda. "Well, well, well," Ganon shouted over the rain, backing away from the trunk with the brick in his hands. "What do we have here?" Maya let out a perfectly pitched scream of horror. "That's not mine! I swear to God, I've never seen that before in my life." "Save it for the judge," Ganon sneered, walking up to her and dangling the bag in front of her face. "You're looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years, Denise, hands behind your back." As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Maya kept her head down, sobbing hysterically. But beneath the curtain of her wet hair, her eyes were burning with a fierce, cold triumph. Ganon had just sealed his own fate. The brick of cocaine he had planted was stolen from a police evidence locker 3 weeks prior, a fact the FBI already knew. But what Ganon didn't know was that before the drugs had been logged into the precinct system, a cooperating federal informant had sprayed the packaging with a proprietary, microscopic UV-reactive chemical dye. The moment Ganon touched that brick to plant it in her car, the invisible dye transferred to his hands, his jacket, his steering wheel, and his skin. It was a dye that wouldn't wash off for a month. They hauled her to the 12th precinct. They booked her, fingerprinted her, and threw her in a holding cell that smelled of vomit and rust. She spent 2 days in the county jail, sleeping on a concrete bench, eating stale bologna sandwiches, playing the role of the broken, terrified civilian to perfection. She let them formally charge her. She let the district attorney indict her. She let Ganon build his entire narrative, swearing on official police reports, signing his name to sworn affidavits. She let him build a towering fortress of perjury. And now, sitting in courtroom 302, she was watching him lay the final brick. As defense attorney Arthur Pendleton, who was fully briefed and entirely in on the FBI sting, retreated from the podium, Judge Wallace adjusted his glasses. "Any redirect, Mr. Russo?" the judge asked. "No, Your Honor. The prosecution rests," Russo said confidently. Judge Wallace turned to Pendleton. "Mr. Pendleton, are you ready to present the defense?" Pendleton stood up, straightening his tie. He suddenly didn't look like a bumbling public defender anymore. His posture straightened, and a sharp, dangerous gleam appeared in his eye. "We are, Your Honor," Pendleton said clearly, his voice carrying to the very back of the gallery. "The defense calls its first and only witness. We call Special Agent Maya Reynolds to the stand." Detective Ganon, who had just stepped off the witness box and was walking back to the prosecution table, froze in his tracks. He turned around, his brow furrowing in confusion. Russo looked up from his notes, bewildered. "Objection, Your Honor. Who is Maya Reynolds? She is not on the witness list." Pendleton offered a wolfish smile. "Your Honor, the defense is allowed to call the defendant to the stand in her own defense." Maya Reynolds is her legal, government-issued name. Judge Wallace frowned. Mr. Pendleton, your client's name is Denise Carter. At the defense table, the terrified, shivering woman in the grey cardigan stood up. She didn't look scared anymore. Her posture was ramrod straight, her expression forged of absolute, unyielding iron. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a leather bifold wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gleaming gold shield and a federal identification card. My name is Special Agent Maya Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Your Honor. Her voice rang out, clear and authoritative, shattering the silence of the courtroom like a gunshot. And I have been undercover for the last 8 months, investigating Detective Ryan Ganon for racketeering, extortion, and perjury. The courtroom erupted. The pandemonium in courtroom 302 was instantaneous and deafening. Reporters in the gallery scrambled over the wooden pews, frantically whispering into their cell phones. Ada Simon Rousseau dropped his heavy legal binder, the loud smack of paper hitting the linoleum floor, lost in the rising tide of shouting voices. Detective Ryan Ganon stood perfectly still, stranded in the center of the room, his ruddy complexion draining to a sickly, ashen grey. His eyes, previously locked in a confident swagger, were now wide with the primal terror of a predator that had just realized it was standing in the center of a steel trap. "Order! Order in this court!" Judge Arthur Wallace roared, his heavy wooden gavel slamming against the sounding block with the rapid-fire intensity of a machine gun. "I will clear this gallery! Bailiffs, lock the doors!" As the uniformed court officers rushed to secure the exits, Maya Reynolds stepped out from behind the defense table. The oversized, frumpy grey cardigan that had defined her victimhood was discarded on the back of her chair. Beneath it, she wore a sharp, tailored black suit that radiated authority. Her posture was completely transformed. The trembling, weeping civilian was gone, replaced by an apex predator of the federal government. She walked toward the witness box with measured, deliberate steps. As she passed Ganon, she didn't so much as glance at him, dismissing his existence entirely. "Your Honor," Arthur Pendleton said, his voice cutting through the dying murmurs of the stunned room. "The defense moves to admit into evidence defense exhibits A through F, comprising authenticated federal wiretap audio, hidden camera video footage, and chemical forensic reports, all gathered under a sealed Title III warrant, authorized by Federal Magistrate Judge Thomas Klein." Judge Wallace took off his glasses, rubbing his temples as he looked from Pendleton to the woman taking the oath on the stand. "Mr. Rousseau," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "did the district attorney's office have any knowledge of this undercover operation?" Rousseau looked like he was about to vomit. He grabbed the edges of his table to steady himself. "No, Your Honor. The state is entirely blindsided by this development. I am swearing you in, Agent Reynolds," Judge Wallace said, leaning over his bench. "And you had better be prepared to back up the explosive grenade you have just thrown into my courtroom." "I am, Your Honor," Maya replied smoothly, her voice crisp and echoing through the microphone. "Proceed, Mr. Pendleton," the judge ordered. "Agent Reynolds," Pendleton began, pacing in front of the jury box. The 12 men and women were leaning so far forward they were practically falling out of their seats. "Could you please explain to the court the nature of the FBI's investigation into Detective Ganon and the 12th Precinct's night shift? For the past 2 years, the Baltimore Field Office's Public Corruption Unit has been investigating a systemic ring of extortion, narcotics trafficking, and evidence tampering operating out of the West District," Maya stated, looking directly at the jury. Detective Ryan Ganon was identified as the ringleader. He and his squad targeted vulnerable citizens, extorting money from mid-level criminals and framing innocent civilians to boost their arrest statistics and secure federal grant money. "Objection," Rousseau stammered weakly, mostly out of muscle memory. This is highly prejudicial. Overruled, Mr. Russo. Sit down, Judge Wallace snapped, not taking his eyes off Maya. I want to hear every word of this. Because the corruption was so deeply entrenched, and because Detective Ganon heavily utilized the blue wall of silence to insulate himself from internal affairs, Maya continued. My supervisors and I engineered a sting operation. I assumed the identity of Denise Carter, a fictional citizen designed to fit Detective Ganon's preferred victim profile, an isolated, working-class black woman with no political or financial resources. Ganon, who had retreated to the prosecution table, was gripping the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles were white. She's lying, he hissed under his breath. This is a setup. Pendleton ignored him and gestured to a federal technician who had quietly wheeled a large flat-screen monitor into the center of the room. Agent Reynolds, let's discuss the events of October 14th. Did Detective Ganon conduct a lawful traffic stop on your vehicle? No, sir. He did not, Maya replied. The vehicle I was driving was heavily modified by the FBI's Technical Operations Group. We had GPS telemetry, proving I never crossed the double yellow line. Furthermore, we had 3 separate high-definition cameras and a suite of microphones recording the entire encounter. Pendleton nodded. Your Honor, I ask to play Defense Exhibit B, the trunk camera footage from the night of October 14th. Play it, Wallace commanded. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. On the screen, the grainy, rain-streaked blackness of a car trunk appeared. The audio hissed with the sound of a torrential downpour. Suddenly, the trunk popped open, flooding the space with the harsh, blinding glare of a police flashlight. There, on a 70-inch screen in absolute clarity, was the unmistakable face of Detective Ryan Ganon. The courtroom watched in breathless silence as the towering detective reached into his own heavy, fleece-lined tactical jacket. He pulled out a large, duct-taped brick of white powder. The microphone picked up his heavy breathing as he wedged it forcefully into the gap between the spare tire and the chassis. A second later, his voice boomed from the speakers. Well, 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 what do we have here? A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. Several jurors covered their mouths in shock. The illusion of the heroic veteran detective shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. That video was captured from a pinhole camera embedded in the trunk latch, Maya explained calmly over the murmurs. The narcotics you see Detective Ganon planting were stolen by him from a police evidence locker on September 22nd. The FBI knew this because a confidential informant alerted us to the theft. Pendleton stepped forward, pulling a small, heavy metal flashlight from his briefcase. Agent Reynolds, if the FBI knew the drugs were stolen, did you take any precautions before Detective Ganon deployed them? We did, Maya smiled, a cold, surgical expression. Before the narcotics were stolen, our technicians sprayed the taped packaging with a proprietary, highly concentrated, UV-reactive chemical dye. It is a synthetic compound that binds permanently to skin oils, leather, and synthetic fabrics. It is completely invisible to the naked eye, and it cannot be washed off with standard soap or water for approximately 30 days. Ganon's head snapped up. He looked down at his own hands, his eyes widening in sudden, horrific realization. He frantically rubbed his palms against his suit trousers, a gesture of desperate panic that was entirely visible to the jury. Your Honor, Pendleton said, turning to the bench. With the court's permission, we have a federal forensic technician present who can operate a high-intensity ultraviolet lamp. Judge Wallace leaned forward, his face a mask of absolute fury directed entirely at Ganon. Proceed. The federal technician stepped forward, turning off the primary overhead lights in the courtroom. He flipped the switch on a heavy, industrial UV lamp. A cone of deep, violet light washed over the prosecution table. Instantly, Detective Ryan Ganon lit up like a Christmas tree. His palms, his fingers, and his cuticles were glowing with a brilliant, radioactive neon green. The dye was smeared across the lapels of his suit jacket where he had touched it, transferred to the wooden edge of the prosecution table, and glowing brightly on the handle of his leather belt. It was indisputable, undeniable, glowing proof of his corruption. "As you can see," Maya said, her voice echoing in the darkened room, "Detective Ganon's hands are covered in the trace chemical marker from the planted evidence. He brought the drugs. He planted the drugs. He lied under oath." "Bailiffs!" Judge Wallace shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Ganon. "Take that man into custody immediately. Mr. Russo, you will strike this case from the docket with prejudice, or I will hold your entire office in contempt." Two heavily armed court bailiffs advanced on Ganon. The veteran detective, a man who had commanded fear and respect for 2 decades, suddenly looked small, pathetic, and entirely broken. He didn't fight as they violently wrenched his arms behind his back and slapped the steel cuffs over his glowing, neon-green wrists. As they dragged him out of the courtroom, his eyes met Maya's one last time. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just stared back at him with the cold, unyielding weight of justice, watching the doors swing shut on his ruined life. While the theatrical takedown of Ryan Ganon was unfolding in courtroom 302, a far more kinetic operation was taking place 3 miles away at the 12th precinct. Special agent in charge, Daniel Higgins, sat in the passenger seat of an armored black SUV, watching the rain wash over the brick facade of the precinct. In his earpiece, he heard the live feed from the courthouse. The moment Judge Wallace screamed for the bailiffs to arrest Ganon, Higgins keyed his radio. "Green light, I repeat, green light. Execute all warrants, take the house." The doors of 4 unmarked vans slid open simultaneously. 30 FBI agents, clad in heavy tactical gear with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters across their backs, flooded out onto the pavement. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision, breaching the front doors of the precinct and swarming the building like a highly trained hive of hornets. "Federal agents, nobody move. Hands away from your weapons and step back from your desks." Higgins roared over a bullhorn as he breached the bullpen. Uniformed police officers froze in their tracks. The precinct erupted in chaos as federal agents secured the perimeter, physically separating the clean cops from the dirty ones. Higgins held a stack of federal arrest warrants, signed in blue ink by a federal magistrate. Officer Paul Detman, Ganon's loyal partner and the muscle of the night shift, was sitting at his desk, typing up a falsified arrest report when the doors burst open. Seeing the tactical armor and the federal shields, Detman's survival instinct kicked in. He shoved his desk chair backward, knocking over a filing cabinet, and bolted for the rear fire exit. He didn't make it 5 feet. 2 FBI SWAT operators tackled him to the linoleum floor, driving a knee into the small of his back and wrestling his arms behind him. Detman spat blood onto the floor as the zip ties ratcheted tight around his wrists. "Paul Detman, you are under arrest for conspiracy against rights, racketeering and extortion." Higgins read from the warrant, standing over the disgraced officer. "We've got your bank accounts. We've got your offshore wire transfers. We have the dashcam footage. It's over." Within an hour, the 12th precinct was completely neutralized. Federal evidence response teams were tearing through the evidence locker, auditing every single seizure the night shift had made over the last 5 years. They found $400,000 in unaccounted cash stuffed in the false bottom of a gym bag in Detman's locker. They found a ledger detailing protection payoffs from local drug corners in the trunk of another officer's squad car. The blue wall of silence, the impenetrable fortress that Ganon had relied on for years, didn't just crack, it utterly disintegrated. The moment the other officers in the night shift were separated into different interrogation rooms and informed that their leader had been arrested in open court by an undercover FBI agent, they began turning on each other. It was a race to see who could secure a plea deal first. They traded years of their lives for the names of corrupt judges, dirty union reps, and complicit commanders. The rot went deep, but Maya's operation had severed the head of the snake. 3 days later, Maya Reynolds walked into the federal holding facility in downtown Baltimore. The air conditioning was humming loudly, the air smelling of antiseptic and stale coffee. She wore a grey trench coat over her suit and carried a single manila folder. She swiped her badge at the heavily reinforced steel door of Interrogation Room A, waiting for the heavy magnetic lock to disengage with a loud thwack. Inside, Ryan Ganon was sitting at a metal table bolted to the floor. He was wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed his broad shoulders. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The silver-flecked hair that he usually kept impeccably styled was greasy and flat against his forehead. He didn't look like a kingmaker anymore. He looked like a tired, old man. He didn't look up when Maya walked in and sat across from him. He just stared blankly at his hands. Even after 3 days of frantic scrubbing with industrial soap in his cell, a faint, sickly green hue still lingered in the creases of his knuckles. Detman flipped, Maya said quietly, dropping the manila folder onto the table. He gave up the offshore accounts in the Caymans. He gave up the real estate shell companies. He even gave up the location of the burner phones you use to orchestrate the shakedowns on the east side. Ganon didn't move. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a hoarse, defeated rasp. Why? Why did Detman flip? Maya asked, raising an eyebrow. Because there is no honor among thieves, Ryan. You built a team of predators. When cornered, predators eat their own to survive. Not him, Ganon said, finally lifting his head to look her in the eye. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with dark, bruised circles. Why you? You could have gone after the cartel task force. You could have gone after the politicians taking kickbacks on the development contracts. Why spend 8 months of your life pretending to be a nobody in a rundown apartment just to ruin me? Maya leaned forward, resting her forearms on the cold steel table. Her expression was completely devoid of sympathy. You think Denise Carter was a nobody? Maya asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. That's exactly why I came after you, Ganon. Because of how you view the people you are sworn to protect. She tapped the manila folder. You didn't target kingpins. You didn't target men with power or money. Because you are a coward. You targeted the people who are already invisible. Single mothers. Kids who couldn't afford bail. People who are fighting every day just to survive in a system that is rigged against them. You looked at a black woman in a cheap sweater, driving a busted car, and you saw a victim you could crush without consequence. Ganon swallowed hard, looking away. You thought she had no voice, Maya continued, her words hitting like hammer strikes. You thought no one would care if you threw her in a cage to steal a promotion. But I cared. The Bureau cared. You thought you were untouchable because you hid behind a badge, but all you did was paint a target on your own back. Maya stood up, buttoning her trench coat. She looked down at him, the vast chasm of power between them, finally in its rightful alignment. The Department of Justice is bringing 22 counts of federal civil rights violations, perjury, and racketeering against you, Maya said, turning toward the door. The U.S. Attorney isn't offering a plea deal. You are going to a federal penitentiary, Ryan. And in a federal penitentiary, nobody cares about the badge you used to wear. Ganon slumped forward, burying his face in his faintly glowing hands, the weight of his destroyed life finally crushing the last of his breath. Maya knocked twice on the heavy steel door. The guard opened it, and she stepped out into the hallway, leaving Detective Ryan Ganon entirely in the dark. The fallout from Detective Ryan Ganon's arrest was a localized earthquake that rattled the foundations of Baltimore's criminal justice system. The local news stations ran round-the-clock coverage, playing the leaked courtroom footage of Ganon's glowing green hands on a continuous loop. The district attorney's office was humiliated, scrambling to review every single conviction tied to the night shift over the past decade. Hundreds of cases were immediately thrown out, and dozens of wrongfully imprisoned citizens were walking free. But for Special Agent Maya Reynolds, the mission was far from over. Cornered animals were always the most dangerous, and Ganon was a veteran predator who knew exactly how the system worked. 3 weeks after his dramatic arrest, Maya sat in the viewing room of the FBI's downtown holding facility, staring through the two-way glass. Inside the interrogation room sat Ganon, looking surprisingly composed, alongside his high-priced defense attorney, a ruthless legal shark named Harrison Cole. Across the table from them sat the United States Attorney for the District of Maryland, a stern woman named Patricia Owens, and Special Agent in Charge Daniel Higgins. It was a proffer session, a highly guarded legal negotiation where a defendant offers information in exchange for leniency. "My client is facing 22 federal counts," Harrison Cole said smoothly, straightening his custom-tailored suit. "But let's be honest, Madam U.S. Attorney. The night shift was just the muscle. You want the brain. You want the man who was protecting my client from internal affairs, who was green-lighting the extortion, and who was taking 40% of the skimmed cash off the top." Through the glass, Maya's jaw tightened. She keyed the microphone that fed directly into Higgins's earpiece. "He's bluffing, Daniel. He's trying to buy his way out of a 20-year sentence." Higgins didn't react to Maya's voice. He leaned forward. "We already have Detman cooperating, Mr. Cole. We don't need your client to dismantle the precinct. We have the wiretaps. We have the UV dye. We have him dead to rights." Ganon finally spoke, a nasty, confident smirk playing on his lips. "Detman knows the street-level payouts. He doesn't know the brass. I do. I have physical evidence, a ledger, audio recordings, and offshore routing numbers that directly implicates Deputy Commissioner Bradley Hayes." The name sucked the air out of the room. Bradley Hayes was the second most powerful police official in the city, a political heavyweight rumored to be planning a run for mayor. If Hayes was dirty, it was the biggest corruption scandal in state history. "You're asking for full federal immunity in exchange for this evidence," U.S. Attorney Owens said, her voice betraying a hint of hesitation. "I'm asking to walk out of these doors today, fully pardoned with my pension intact," Ganon said, leaning back in his chair. "You get the deputy commissioner, and I get my life back. The evidence is secured in a location only I know. If something happens to me, or if I go to trial, that evidence disappears forever. Do we have a deal?" In the observation room, Maya slammed her fist against the console. If Ganon got immunity, the entire undercover operation, the months of living in fear, the humiliation in the courtroom, the fight for the innocent people he destroyed, would be meaningless. Ganon would retire on a beach somewhere, funded by the taxpayers he had terrorized. She keyed her mic again. "Give me 24 hours, Daniel. Stall him. Do not sign that deal." Inside the room, Higgins caught Owens's eye and gave a subtle nod. "We will take your terms under advisement, Mr. Cole. We reconvene tomorrow at noon." As soon as the meeting adjourned, Maya sprinted to the bullpen. She pulled up every financial record, every phone log, and every piece of surveillance the Bureau had on Ganon prior to his arrest. She had 24 hours to find a needle in a digital haystack. Ganon said he had physical evidence, a ledger and recordings. It had to be somewhere secure, somewhere a raid on his house or precinct wouldn't find it. "Where do dirty cops hide their insurance policies?" Maya muttered to herself, pacing in front of a white board covered in Ganon's life history. She looked at his family tree. Both parents deceased, no siblings, divorced 10 years ago from a woman named Cynthia Miller, who had since moved to Florida and remarried. Cynthia Miller. Maya froze. She dove back into the financial data, pulling up Ganon's bank statements from 5 years ago, right around the time the night shift started their extortion ring. She looked for recurring payments, tiny anomalies that an auditor might miss. There it was. An annual payment of $150 to a localized community bank in the suburbs of Towson, Maryland. The account was not in Ganon's name. It was a safety deposit box registered to Cynthia Miller. He had used his ex-wife's identity, knowing the Bureau would be looking for his own assets or those of his current associates. Maya grabbed her tactical jacket and sprinted toward Higgins's office. "I have the location of the dead man's switch. Get a federal magistrate on the phone right now. I need a search warrant for the First Towson Bank, and I need it 10 minutes ago." At 8 a.m. the next morning, Maya walked into the vault of the First Towson Bank, flanked by 2 FBI evidence technicians. The bank manager, trembling slightly, drilled the lock on box 402. Maya pulled the long metal container out and opened the lid. Inside sat a black leather-bound ledger, 3 USB flash drives, and a stack of printed emails. Maya opened the ledger. It was a meticulous, handwritten accounting of every bribe, every stolen kilo, and every kickback sent up the chain of command to Deputy Commissioner Bradley Hayes. Ganon had kept his insurance policy perfectly organized. It was brilliant, but Maya Reynolds was smarter. At exactly 11:55 a.m., Ryan Ganon sat in the same interrogation room, a smug, relaxed aura radiating from him. He adjusted his orange jumpsuit as if it were a tuxedo. Beside him, Harrison Cole was already drafting the preliminary framework of the immunity agreement. U.S. Attorney Owens and SAC Higgins walked into the room, their expressions utterly unreadable. "Well," Ganon smiled, folding his hands on the table. "I assume you've drawn up the paperwork? It's a win-win, really. You get the headline-grabbing arrest of the Deputy Commissioner, and I go quietly into the night." Before Owens could speak, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room swung open. Maya Reynolds walked in, carrying a clear plastic federal evidence bag. She didn't say a word. She simply walked up to the table and dropped the bag directly in front of Ganon. Inside the bag was the black leather-bound ledger and the 3 USB drives. Ganon's smug smile vanished instantly. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His eyes darted from the bag to Maya, his breathing suddenly shallow and panicked. "We seized box 402 at the First Towson Bank this morning, Ryan," Maya said, her voice a calm, lethal whisper. "Registered under Cynthia Miller. We have the ledger. We have the flash drives. We have Deputy Commissioner Hayes." Harrison Cole looked at his client in horror, realizing instantly that their leverage had just evaporated into thin air. "Ryan, what is she talking about?" Maya leaned down, bringing her face inches from Ganon's. You thought you were the smartest guy in the room. You thought you could use the very corruption you helped build as a get-out-of-jail-free card. But you forgot one crucial detail." "What?" Ganon whispered hoarsely. "You're not dealing with the people you used to bully on the streets," Maya said, her eyes burning with righteous fury. "You're dealing with me. The immunity deal is off the table. The U.S. Attorney is proceeding to trial on all 22 counts." The trial of Detective Ryan Ganon, which concluded 6 months later, was an absolute massacre. Without his leverage, Ganon was forced to face the overwhelming mountain of evidence Maya had meticulously gathered. During the 2-week federal trial, the jury watched the trunk video. They heard the wiretaps, and they listened to the harrowing testimonies of the citizens Ganon had framed. But the final nail in the coffin was Maya's testimony. She sat on the stand for 3 days, unshakable, brilliantly dissecting every lie the defense tried to construct. When Harrison Cole tried to argue entrapment, claiming the FBI forced Ganon to plant the drugs, Maya calmly pointed out that Ganon had stolen the drugs 3 weeks before he ever laid eyes on her, proving extreme premeditation. On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, the jury returned their verdict after only 4 hours of deliberation. Maya sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing her signature dark suit. Across the aisle sat the families of Ganon's victims, holding hands, tears streaming down their faces. On count 1, conspiracy to violate civil rights, how do you find? Judge Wallace asked the jury foreman. Guilty, Your Honor. On count 2, racketeering. Guilty, Your Honor. On count 3, evidence tampering and perjury. Guilty, Your Honor. The word guilty echoed 22 times in the silent courtroom, each one striking Ganon like a physical blow. He stood beside his lawyer, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. The terrifying, untouchable king of the West District was entirely broken. Judge Wallace didn't wait for a separate sentencing hearing. He looked down at Ganon with absolute disgust. Ryan Ganon, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a more egregious, malicious, and systematic abuse of power, the judge thundered. You wore a badge that represents trust, safety, and justice. You weaponized it to terrorize the most vulnerable members of our society for your own financial gain. You are a disgrace to the uniform and a danger to the public. Judge Wallace banged his gavel. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You are remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals. The gallery erupted into cheers, sobs, and applause. Maya didn't cheer. She stood up quietly, buttoning her jacket, and watched as the marshals placed Ganon in handcuffs. As they led him toward the side door, he stopped and looked back at Maya. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, only the hollow, terrifying realization of a man who knew he would likely die in a concrete cell. Maya held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the courtroom. That evening, as the sun set over the Baltimore harbor, painting the sky in deep shades of purple and gold, Maya drove her unmarked bureau vehicle down Fremont Avenue. She pulled over near the rundown apartment building where she had spent 8 months living as Denise Carter. The neighborhood looked the same. The neon sign on the laundromat was still flickering. The discount grocery store was still busy, but there was a subtle shift in the air. The predatory police cruisers that used to crawl down these streets, striking fear into the hearts of the residents, were gone. A new precinct commander had been brought in, and the night shift had been entirely eradicated. Maya watched a young black mother walk down the sidewalk holding her daughter's hand, laughing at a joke the little girl told. They walked right past the spot where Ganon had pulled Maya over on that rainy October night. They walked without fear, without looking over their shoulders. Maya smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached her eyes. She put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The bureau had already handed her a new assignment. Another city, another corrupt official, another phantom life to build. Maya Reynolds would become someone else entirely tomorrow. But tonight, she knew she had left the world just a little bit safer than she found it. The ghost of Denise Carter could finally rest. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet federal agent waiting patiently in a cheap grey cardigan. Maya Reynolds' story is a powerful reminder that no one is above the law, and that systemic corruption can be dismantled when brave individuals refuse to look the other way. True power doesn't come from a badge used to bully the vulnerable. It comes from the relentless, uncompromising pursuit of the truth. If this incredible true-life takedown kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a brilliant justice story and make sure to subscribe for more thrilling deep dives into real-life undercover operations. Leave a comment down below. What would you have done if you were in Maya's shoes during that terrifying traffic stop?